Kruger has always been a co-pilot brand, comfortable working in someone else's shadow. Until now, that is. This is the L-21 Wolf, the first solo act from Kruger, and it's got people talking. Not just because it's fast, not just because it's gorgeous, but because, for the first time ever, Kruger's dropped the support role and stepped into the fight. At first glance, the Wolf looks like a statement piece. Aerodynamic lines, tight fuselage, and a minimalist footprint. It's bold, beautiful, and a much-needed breath of fresh air amongst the usual design philosophies that we're used to seeing. But beneath the style, there's substance. This isn't just a showroom fighter. It's a direct competitor to the Aegis Gladius and the Anvil Arrow, and depending on what kind of pilot you are, it might just be the better choice. In this video, we'll break down the L-21's design, the combat performance, its use case scenarios, and its current role in the PvP meta. I'll be comparing it head-to-head with both the Arrow and the Gladius, and we'll talk about whether this ship is worth adding to your hangar. Welcome back everyone to Forge Core Gaming. I'm your host Phoenix, and today we're taking an honest look at the L-21 Wolf from Kruger Intergalactic. Before we dive in, just a quick reminder, I'm ramping up review production as we get closer to IAE. A lot of you like having up-to-date ship data before making buyback or pledge decisions, so if you want to stay ahead of the curve, just make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of the upcoming deep dives. And if you find this review helpful, drop it a like. It really helps push these videos to more Star Citizen pilots who might be looking for the same answers you are. One more quick note, we've recently partnered up with theimpound.com, so if you enjoy getting discounts on Star Citizen, check out the link in the description for the Impound. Using that link gets you a small discount for the most trusted gray mark ship seller in the Star Citizen ecosystem. Just a heads up, using that link does also benefit this channel in a small way. No pressure though, of course, because we at ForgeCore are big believers that most ships in Star Citizen can be earned for free just by playing the game. Now without further ado, let's get into it. Now let's kick this review off with a tour of the exterior. Normally, on light fighters like this, we wouldn't spend a whole lot of time discussing the exterior, but the Wolf is a bit of a showstopper in the looks department, so we'll take our time as we move around it. First and foremost, we can't help but take note of the 50s sci-fi influence here that creates an impactful design that you either love or you hate. Working our way from the front, the tip of the Wolf sits pointed slightly skyward as though in attention or ready to attack at any moment. From the sharp point at the very tip, we could draw a single line that continues all the way to the rear engine exhaust cone, making for a subtle, subconscious continuity that helps bring everything together. Moving back just a couple of steps, we can take note of light styling accents that accentuate slight indentations in the body paneling and help guide the eye towards the finer design choices made by Kruger engineers. Continuing further back, we make our way to the low-lying wings that seamlessly meld both the body and the engines into a single cohesive unit. Sitting topside closer to the ship hull, we have the retractable bespoke ballistic Gatling guns positioned on both of the cockpit's flanks. If we move to the rear of the wing, we find the single entry point to the ship, activatable via a switch on the rear of the wing, and if we move just a little further, we encounter a hidden gun rack, which is a nice feature for those fighter pilots that prefer to bring a plan B along with them. Scooting around to the rear, we see the giant rear main thruster proudly exposing some of its inner mechanical workings, acting as if boasting about the quality of Kruger's manufacturing. One detail I love about the exposed engine parts is that some of the exhaust piping actually goes from a dull metal to glowing red when placed under load. It's a subtle touch that I hope to see in more ships that come out in the future. Moving around to the starboard side of the ship, on the rear side of the wing, we have an external cargo bin that facilitates carrying up to 450,000 micro SCU of additional items, which isn't that much, but it's enough to warrant mentioning. Now let's move on to the interior of the ship and hop into what I think many would agree is one of the most well-done cockpit setups of any ship in the Star Citizen universe. To start off, I would like to mention absolutely every single part of this cockpit looks like it was made for this ship and only this ship. Generally, MFDs and buttons from other ships in the verse look like they could be pretty easily swapped into just about anything else, but this, Kruger really outdid themselves here by making everything look like it was form-fitted for this specific flying experience. Along the exterior edges of the dash, we have a couple of buttons for opening the canopy and exterior hatches, and on the other side we have buttons for power and engines. Now I'll admit, in this current form, those buttons are a little difficult to use, but it's no secret that the Star Citizen user interface needs some work. Moving on, I really like these two static dials on the interior edges of the MFDs, one showing your boost gauge, the other your velocity, and personally, I almost prefer these over the advanced HUD speedometer and boost gauges, and I even turned off my advanced HUD for a small duration during my testing. Then of course we have these custom formed MFDs that, again, look like they belong in this ship and this ship alone. And though we only have 2 of them rather than 3 or 4, I never felt as though I was lacking information. Finally, front and center, we have this fairly analog clock that is just, it's a nice touch that harkens back to the design era that influenced 50s era sci-fi. Now that we're done with the tour, let's go ahead and begin this with the stats overview segment of this video. Alright, in the usual fashion, we're going to start off with the DPS and shields, then we'll work our way over to flight characteristics. And we'll take this puppy out for a field test and discuss what we find. First off, the Wolf comes standard with bespoke ballistic guns, which was controversial to begin with, as CIG isn't exactly batting 1,000 with making ballistic weapons that players actually want to use. But the story seems a bit different here, and that's because unlike other ballistic Gatlings, the bespoke Relentless L21s have a projectile velocity of 1,650 meters per second, making them almost as fast as the CF laser repeaters, and they put out a combined DPS of 1,354 sustained damage per second, which for your G-Wiz is slightly higher than the DPS on a Gladius in a full NDB-30 loadout. On top of that, they're size 4 Gatlings, so in the future when armor becomes relevant, the Wolf will have a wider variety of target ships that its weapons will still be effective against. Now when it comes to shields, the Wolf is a softie with a stock shield pool of 3000 HP in a bubble configuration, courtesy of 2 size 1 shields, and those protect the hull that has only 8500 HP, which is low, but still higher than that of the Gladius, but a little less than that of the Arrow. Now when it comes to flight characteristics, the Wolf has a top SCM speed of 230 meters per second unboosted, and can boost up to 510 meters per second, and has a max nav speed of 1225 meters per second. When it comes to pitch yaw and roll, unboosted, the Wolf maneuvers at 75 to 210 degrees per second respectively, which is fast even amongst other light fighters, and can boost those numbers up to 90, 62, 252 degrees per second. Just for comparison, that's faster than both the Gladius and the Arrow, except for the Arrow's yaw rate, which is 68 degrees per second boosted, but as a commenter recently pointed out to me, you shouldn't be yawing as much as you should be rolling and pitching when using fighters. Thanks for the tip, by the way. I've been using it every day, including during the filming of this video. Now, the Wolf is light, coming in at 23,350 kilograms, making it less than half the mass of the Gladius, and that's also reflected in its size. The Wolf is pretty dang small, coming in at 5.25 meters wide by 12 meters long and only 3 meters tall when the landing gear is retracted, though I don't think that includes the little ventral fin that everyone seems to hate. Now when it comes to fuel, the Wolf has a measly 0.9 SCU quantum fuel tank, meaning you'll need to refill for your return trip after pretty much every interplanetary jump, which I suppose is okay because you'll also need to refill your ammo after a few bounties anyways. Now when it comes to hydrogen fuel, the Wolf carries 9 SCUs, which is also fine as this isn't intended to go long distances. As with other fighters, it's likely intended to be carried into a conflict by a capital class ship, do its work, and then get carried home. Now when it comes to claim time, the good news continues as the Wolf can be claimed in just 4 minutes unexpedited, and just 1 minute if you decide to expedite it. And doing so will only cost you 1,710 AUEC. And now that we've wrapped up the stats, let's get into the field test and see how the Wolf puts those numbers to use. Naturally, given that this is a light fighter, I wanted to see how well it performed in combat. Unfortunately, Arena Commander wouldn't load up the guns at all, so Pirate Swarm was out of the question, so I hopped in the PTU and decided to queue up some bounties. Sadly, as you may know, each PTU iteration erases your bounty progress, so I really only got to test it out on VLRT bounties, and as you would expect, those bounties were a little too easy to make an actual assessment of the Wolf, but I can say this: these guns are satisfying to use, not only when it comes to the sound and visceral feeling you get when using them, but it's extremely easy to keep your guns on target with the Wolf's high maneuverability. Now, even the devs have stated that the Wolf cannot take that many hits, so I would be hesitant to take this into anything beyond MRT level bounties. The damage those ships can put out is just a little too high for my liking when using a ship like this. With that said, I did take the Gladius, Arrow, and Wolf out into free flight mode in Arena Commander because despite not having a chance to do PvP, I could use handling and maneuverability as an indicator as to which one would outperform the other. Here's what I found. The Gladius and Wolf were, in my opinion, the easiest to pilot. I'm not sure why, but the Arrow just didn't feel as good to me as those two, so for the most part, I'm just going to be comparing the Gladius and the Wolf. Now the Gladius is a bit heavier than the Wolf, so all things being equal in the realm of thrust capacity, the Wolf should accelerate faster, and I found that to be true. Now, either reported numbers of thrust capacity are inaccurate, or CIG only loosely uses them as hierarchical guides and not true physical inputs, because the Wolf should be about 2 times as fast as the Gladius when it comes to accelerating to top speed, and I did not find that to be the case during my test, but that's just anecdote. And I do plan to do a deeper investigation behind flight physics in the coming weeks, so stay tuned for that video. I digress. For the most part, I felt like it was easier to point the Wolf in the direction I wanted it to go in. Additionally, the lower mass equated to less perceived inertia when I was making hairpin maneuvers or during tight cornering, and in several situations, when I thought for sure I was going to crash, I was able to flick the throttle into a roll, pitch up or down, and completely avoid the collision. It was a blast. Now, was the difference so vast that I think the Wolf is a counter to the Gladius? Not at all. I think it's close enough that it's going to boil down to pilot skill. And if you put 2 pilots of equal pilot skill into each ship, the statistical outcome would likely resemble an honest coin toss scenario. But I am open to being wrong about that, and I have plans to test that further in the future. Now, as far as the intended targets go for the Wolf, generally speaking, I work off the rule of thumb, the bigger the guns, the bigger the intended target. But in this case, I don't think that's actually true. I think the size 4 guns were used because CIG could only fit 2 guns on the Wolf due to its design, and they had to still keep it competitive with other leading light fighters. So they had to have an equivalent of 3 size 3 weapons, but while only having 2 weapon hardpoints. And I say this for a couple of reasons. The damage output of the Wolf's payload, though respectable, is finite in nature due to it being ballistic, so large ships may be difficult to take down. Looking at the high projectile velocity, again 1,650 meters per second, it really makes me think that these guns were meant for hunting down light, medium, and heavy fighters. And then finally, the Wolf is just too fragile, so going against large ships that could potentially have turret positions filled would likely put it at a severe disadvantage as it could not avoid all of that incoming damage. So despite it having 2 size 4 weapons, technically capable of damaging the armor of large ships, I don't think it's meant to pursue targets in that weight class, unless of course, it's operating as part of a fleet. In that case, I could 100% see the Wolf filling the role of a fighter that waits for the moment when enemies are engaged with larger targets before it goes in and using its hull penetrating ballistics, starts prioritizing critical ship components. Now, I'm not usually someone who uses a light fighter. I think the smallest combat ship I've ever owned has been a Gladius, and I think I only took that out 1 or 2 times. I mostly bought it to try out the bomb racks, and I never even got around to doing so. But the Wolf has started to make a believer out of me. To be plain, it's just fun to use. It's also really nice to look at. It has great details, and you can tell CIG just keeps getting better at making ships. At this point, I really want to see more from Kruger. Specifically, I'd like to see what they could do when making ships with habitation areas. Or honestly, I'd love to see a capital ship come from Kruger. Lore-wise, that might be a big ask, as there aren't many precedents for a manufacturer to go from small single-seaters up to capital class ships without hundreds of years of experience making everything in between. But there does technically exist a precedent a la Consolidated Outlines via the Pioneer, so maybe it's a possibility. Now, I don't love everything about the Wolf. I want to get that clear. I, like many of you, really am not a fan of that ventral fin. I'm not going to say that I hate it, but it's definitely out of place. The rest of the ship's silhouette looks, to me, perfect. It's almost as if a dev over at CIG just wanted to see if they could add something novel, and sadly, it kind of sucks. I feel bad for the guy who came up with that idea, honestly, because I think most of the community hates it. Otherwise, yeah, I think the Wolf is a buy and keep while it's only $90 and has LTI type of ship. It's certainly a standout for your fleet, if nothing else, because of the unique design choices CIG made with this one. On its aesthetics, I'm going to give it a monstrously high 8.5 out of 10. On the fun factor, I'm going to give it another high 8 out of 10. And on the usefulness factor, given that it can't be used for anything other than specific combat ranges that we discussed earlier, I have to give it a 5 out of 10, which brings the overall rating of the new L21 Wolf from Kruger Intergalactic to a 7.3 out of 10. And with that, I'm going to wrap up the review. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave us a subscribe and drop the video a like to let YouTube know that you appreciate the work we do here at ForgeCore. We just recently passed 4,000 subscribers. Next goal is 5K, and we're hoping to hit it by the time IAE gets here and we close out our first year of posting YouTube videos. As always, thank you all very much for watching. Fly safe out there, and I'll see you in the verse. Phoenix out.